In the southern reaches of the Pacific Ocean, the crew of a fishing vessel is deep into their routine, processing the day's catch. The calm is shattered when the captain's control panel erupts with an emergency alert. He rushes to the radar, only to find a massive entity closing in on their position at an impossible speed. Terrified, he triggers the siren, sending the crew into a desperate scramble for cover while the command team rushes to the bridge. Before they can even attempt a maneuver, a colossal force slams into the ship, rocking the vessel violently and tearing through the hull. Massive claws reach in, dragging men into the dark water, and with one final, devastating blow from its tail, the creature shatters the control room. Far from the disaster, in the radioactive ruins of Chernobyl, Dr. Niko Tatopoulos is busy using shock devices to collect earthworms for his research into genetic mutations. His work is abruptly interrupted when a military helicopter lands and agents seize his equipment, informing him that he has been reassigned. Nick is flown to the jungles of Panama, where a sergeant leads him to a massive, inexplicable crater in the middle of a village. While Nick is initially confused by the sight, the military realizes what he hasn't yet grasped. The massive hole is actually a fresh footprint of an unimaginable monster. The following morning in Tahiti, Dr. Philippe Rocher visits a hospital to treat the lone survivor of the vessel attack. The man is in a catatonic state, unresponsive to the medical staff until Philippe flicks a cigarette lighter in front of his face. The flame snaps the man back to consciousness, and with a look of pure dread, he whispers the name of the nightmare he witnessed. Gojira. Back at the military base, Nick meets Dr. Elsie Chapman and the research team to review the recordings of the maritime attack. As they analyze the terrifying data, Army helicopters are already in the air, desperately following a trail of destruction that is moving steadily across the ocean. In one of New York City's bustling journalism offices, Audrey returns from her break only to find her boss, Charles, waiting. Seizing the moment, she asks about her long-awaited promotion, but Charles reveals his true colors as a selfish opportunist. He tells her that if she wants the job, she'll have to agree to a dinner date with him later. Meanwhile, Nick and a team of soldiers head toward the shipwreck caused by Godzilla. Upon arrival, the researchers are met with a haunting scene, a massive trail of destruction and a hull that has been torn apart as if it were made of paper. As other teams approach the investigation, the sergeant aggressively orders his soldiers to clear the area. Among the newcomers is Philippe, who claims the group is his own team of investigators, but the military leader ignores him and demands they leave immediately. Unfazed by the tension, Nick explores the wreckage and discovers biological traces of the colossal creature, carefully collecting samples to further his research. As night falls on the west coast of the United States, a group of fishermen experiences a sudden, chilling realization: their boats have stopped moving. Confused, they conclude they must be snagged on something and decide to haul in their nets. This proves to be a fatal mistake. The resistance only worsens the situation as the boats are violently pulled backward, snapping the masts like toothpicks and forcing the crew to abandon ship. As the terrified men huddle together in the water, watching their fleet vanish, they are met with a horrifying sight. One of their own boats is flung dozens of meters into the air before crashing down, crushing the survivors instantly. Back on a military helicopter, the sergeant receives word of this latest massacre. Hearing the description of the colossal beast, Dr. Elsie suggests that the monster could be a theropod allosaurus, a giant reptile thought to have gone extinct during the Cretaceous period. However, Nick offers a more modern, terrifying explanation. He argues that high exposure to radiation likely caused a radical overhaul of the creature's DNA, especially since its first appearance was near a site used for nuclear testing over the last 30 years. He concludes that they aren't just looking at a prehistoric survivor, but a biological aberration, a new species of reptile born from decades of extreme mutation. In a local coffee shop, Audrey vents to her friends about her boss's manipulation, but her attention is quickly diverted to a breaking news report on the recent fishing boat attacks. As she watches the footage, she is stunned to see Nick at the center of the investigation, revealing to her co-workers that the scientist is actually her ex-boyfriend. On the other side of town, an elderly fisherman named Joe prepares for a day of fishing despite a brewing storm. As he casts his line, he notices a macabre movement on the horizon, a massive wave of displacement heading straight for him. He tries desperately to flee, but the pier is instantly pulverized, and Joe is lost beneath the crumbling wood and stone. From the churning surf, the colossal creature finally rises, emerging into New York City and sending dozens of cars flying like toys. Godzilla has arrived, and he begins to tear through the concrete jungle with predatory fury, using his monstrous teeth to snap at everything in his path and crushing vehicles under his massive weight. A few blocks away, a political candidate's speech about urban safety is violently interrupted as Godzilla barrels through the streets, leaving a trail of destruction and terrorized civilians in his wake. In his high-rise office, Charles is so preoccupied arguing with shareholders on the phone that he fails to notice the prehistoric titan passing right behind his window, though the sight leaves his assistant paralyzed with fear. Back at the cafeteria, the ground begins to heave with rhythmic, bone-shaking tremors. Audrey and her friends look out the window to see Godzilla looming over the city, a sight of pure, impossible scale. While most are frozen in shock, an ambitious cameraman named Victor sees an opportunity. He scavenges a camera from an overturned press van and sprints toward the monster, determined to be the first journalist to capture the attack on film. He finds himself directly in Godzilla's path and fumbles with the device, but the heavy rain has caused it to malfunction. For a terrifying moment, Victor stares up at the creature's massive foot as it descends, but the giant reptile misses him by a fraction, continuing its furious rampage through the skyline. Miles away, Nick and the military team arrive at the New Jersey Command Center. They learn that the mayor has officially ordered a mass evacuation, clearing the way for the National Guard to engage the beast in a full-scale urban war. The military officially reports that, since the initial rampage, they have lost visual contact with Godzilla, leading many to believe the creature has retreated back into the depths of the ocean to hide. This news coincides with a broadcast where Charles takes credit for Victor's footage, earning the envy of the entire newsroom. Desperate to prove her value and secure her promotion, Audrey reveals her past relationship with Nick to Charles, hoping it will grant her exclusive access. However, Charles dismisses her, ordering her to surrender her briefcase and follow the mandatory evacuation protocol. Undeterred, Audrey steals Charles's press badge and joins her friend Lucy, deciding to navigate the crumbling city on her own. As New York spirals into total chaos, Victor and Charles take to the air in a news helicopter, broadcasting live reports on the catastrophe. In the midst of the panic, the mayor attempts to push through a crowd of aggressive reporters, unaware that Philippe has subtly planted a listening device on him. From the safety of his van, Philippe intercepts a high-level briefing, where the sergeant admits the situation is dire, and the monster's whereabouts remain a total mystery. Shortly after, special forces arrive to escort the research team into the subway system. Upon entering the tunnels, they find the infrastructure pulverized, a clear sign that the creature is using the underground lines as a subterranean highway. Analyzing the damage, Nick realizes Godzilla isn't fleeing. He's foraging for food. He proposes a desperate plan to draw the beast out, using its own hunger against it. The military immediately mobilizes, deploying a fleet of trucks and tractors to dump tons of fish into the heart of the city, creating a massive pile of bait. However, as the ambush is set, Nick realizes the scent is trapped beneath the street level. He orders the soldiers to pry open the manhole covers to release the smell and lure their target to the surface. With only one cover remaining, Nick grabs a tool and rushes toward the final manhole alone. As he nears the opening, a low, guttural growl echoes from the darkness below. The ground beneath him begins to buckle and fracture until the pavement explodes, and Godzilla erupts from the earth, roaring as he stands over his prize. Stunned by the scale of the creature, Nick freezes and uses his small camera to document the monster as it towers over him. The soldiers nearby tense up, fingers on their triggers, but Nick's presence right in the path of the beast prevents them from firing. Sensing that the small human before him poses no threat, Godzilla ignores Nick and moves toward the bait. The military watches in awe as the massive reptile approaches the central pile, crushing buildings in its wake before beginning to quietly devour the tons of fish. Nick looks on, strangely fascinated by the behavior of the creature he has been studying. However, the silence is short-lived. Due to the creature's immense size and the surrounding rubble, communication between the squads breaks down. Fearing his men are about to be ambushed, the sergeant prematurely orders a full-scale assault. A hail of gunfire and tank missiles erupts, but Godzilla's speed is deceptive. He dodges the incoming explosives, which instead slam into the surrounding skyscrapers. Infuriated by the sudden pain and noise, the monster lunges at the army line, forcing the ground troops into a chaotic retreat to avoid being pulverized. As the mutant reptile weaves through the narrow streets, pursued by military vehicles, it finally strikes back. In a terrifying display of power, the creature unleashes a breath that incinerates the combatants in its path. Overhead, a squadron of helicopters joins the chase, but their missiles miss their mark, striking a building that collapses directly onto a group of soldiers below. Godzilla leads the remaining choppers on a high-speed hunt through the concrete canyons, eventually doubling back to surprise his pursuers. He leaps from the shadows, snapping his jaws and swatting the helicopters from the sky like insects. One final, panicked soldier attempts to flee the carnage, but Godzilla intercepts him, swallowing him instantly. Having cleared his territory, the monster climbs atop a nearby skyscraper, letting out a deafening roar of fury that echoes through the devastated city. In the aftermath of the failed ambush, Nick makes his way back toward New Jersey. Amidst the chaos of a local pharmacy, he crosses paths with Audrey. Shaken by the destruction they have just witnessed, the two reunites and head toward the safety of a military shelter. While talking to Audrey, Nick conducts a series of rapid tests on the biological samples he collected from the wreckage. The results are staggering. Godzilla is pregnant. He realizes that if the creature reproduces, a swarm of mutant lizards could overrun the world. To confirm this terrifying theory, Nick rushes back to his lab, leaving Audrey alone. Seeing her opportunity, Audrey discovers top-secret military tapes among Nick's research. Driven by her desperate desire for the reporter job, she hides the tapes in her bag, ready to hand them over to Charles. Meanwhile, in a clandestine apartment, Philippe and his team of spies continue to intercept military communications, monitoring every move within the city. Back at the base, Nick presents his findings to the High Command, warning them that the hunt for Godzilla must pivot immediately. They aren't just looking for one monster anymore. They are looking for a nest. If they don't find those eggs soon, New York will belong to a new species. However, the mission is jeopardized when a breaking news report airs. Charles has broadcasted the secret tapes Audrey stole. The governor, furious that classified military intel has been leaked, blames Nick for the security breach and fires him from the operation on the spot. Audrey, seeing the devastating consequences of her betrayal, tries to apologize to Nick, but he ignores her, cold and silent, as he boards a taxi for the airport. As the cab pulls away, Nick realizes the driver is heading in the wrong direction. He tries to protest, but the driver ignores him and locks the doors. The driver is revealed to be Philippe, who explains that he is also searching for the nest. Revealing himself as a French intelligence operative, Philippe takes Nick to a secret warehouse filled with a massive arsenal. He tells Nick that his team is there to clean up the radioactive mess their nuclear tests helped create. Nick decides to join Philippe's resistance. After donning combat gear, they slip past the military cordons and descend into the dark subway tunnels to begin their search for the lair. Unbeknownst to them, Audrey and Victor are following close behind, hoping for one last chance at a story. Back on the surface, the military remains focused on the brute force approach, preparing yet another mountain of fish to lure Godzilla into a final, deadly trap. Within minutes, the military spots Godzilla approaching, and the soldiers brace themselves to open fire the moment he enters the park. However, as the creature nears the bait, he realizes it is the same trap as before. Enraged and sensing the ambush, the monster turns and flees the scene. The military erupts into a violent pursuit, with dozens of helicopters raining fire down on the target from every direction. Despite the relentless onslaught, Godzilla reaches the coastline and makes a massive leap over the military lines, vanishing into the depths of the ocean. One of the commanders immediately alerts the Navy, revealing that several submarines are already in position, waiting to intercept and eliminate the threat. As the creature closes in, the submarines launch a barrage of torpedoes, but Godzilla's underwater speed is too great, allowing him to weave through the incoming missiles. On the radar, one crew realizes with horror that the mutant is charging directly at them. They scramble to maneuver the submarine, but they aren't fast enough. Godzilla slams into the vessel, tearing a massive leak in the hull. In the ensuing chaos, the submarine is caught in the path of its own homing missiles and is destroyed. Eventually, the Navy manages to land a direct hit on the creature as it nears the city's edge, leading the authorities to believe the threat has finally been neutralized. Meanwhile, deep underground, Nick and his group finally stumble upon Godzilla's nest. They are frozen in shock at the sight of hundreds of eggs clustered together in the darkness. Suddenly, the silence is broken by the sound of cracking shells as hundreds of hatchlings begin to emerge, surrounding the survivors. Terrified, the soldiers attempt to flee while trying to set their explosives, but several are quickly overtaken and killed by the small, fast-moving predators. Audrey and Victor, caught in the middle of the carnage, scramble through the building's swimming pool area to escape. Realizing they are completely outnumbered, Philippe orders Nick to find a way to contact the military while he and his remaining men hold the line against the swarming hatchlings. In a matter of seconds, Philippe's team is brutally overwhelmed. Desperate to avoid the same fate, Nick sprints toward the elevators, narrowly escaping the dinosaur's reach as the doors slide shut. Shortly after the narrow escape, Nick reunites with Philippe on one of the upper floors, only to be startled when Audrey and Victor suddenly tumble out of the ventilation shafts. Now a unified group, the survivors sprint toward the building's broadcasting room. Their goal is to hijack the airwaves and alert the media and the military to the exact location of the nest. As their report on the swarming hatchlings goes live, Nick makes a grim realization. If this building isn't leveled immediately, thousands of these creatures will escape into New York City. He sends out a desperate plea for the military to destroy the site, even if it means they might not make it out in time. The military receives the message and issues a terrifying ultimatum. The building will be bombed in exactly 6 minutes. The group races through the hallways, pursued by a relentless pack of hatchlings. In a moment of quick thinking, Nick broke the vending machine with gumballs, causing the raptor-like reptiles to slip and tumble, buying the survivors precious seconds. However, as they reach the final exit, they find themselves blocked by a massive horde of hungry predators. Just as military jets scream toward the target area, Philippe fires his weapon into a massive chandelier, sending it crashing down. The noise and debris scatter the hatchlings, giving the group a narrow window to burst out into the street. Moments later, a barrage of missiles strikes the building, collapsing it into a mountain of fire and twisted metal. For a brief second, the group stands among the rubble, believing the nightmare is finally over. But the ground begins to shake. From the heart of the wreckage, a wounded and vengeful Godzilla rises. Seeing the charred remains of his offspring, the monster lets out a cry of pure grief and rage, locking his eyes on the survivors. The group dives into a nearby alleyway as the creature lunges. When Godzilla nearly corners Audrey, Nick heroically pulls her back just as the monster's jaws snap shut. They scramble into an abandoned taxi and floor it, leading the Godzilla on a high-speed chase through the city streets. At one point, they are forced to use the creature's own massive foot as a ramp to jump over a wreckage pile. Despite the arrival of military reinforcements, Godzilla ignores the tanks and helicopters, focusing solely on the taxi carrying the people who destroyed his nest. With a deafening roar, the monster exhales a concussive blast that flips surrounding cars and triggers massive explosions, forcing the taxi into a narrow tunnel where they find themselves trapped, with the furious Godzilla clawing his way in to reach them. Desperate to survive, Nick contacts the military to request an immediate extraction. However, the command center informs him that they cannot reach their current location and orders the group to lure the beast toward the Brooklyn Bridge, where the military has the best chance of a clear shot. Seizing the moment, Philippe switches on the taxi's high beams, blinding the creature long enough for them to speed away. The chase reaches a terrifying climax when Godzilla manages to catch the taxi in his massive jaws. Thinking fast, Nick grabs a loose electrical cable from a downed power pole and jams it into the monster's mouth. The resulting surge of electricity shocks the Godzilla, forcing him to release the vehicle. Philippe floors the accelerator, racing onto the suspension bridge with Godzilla hot on their heels. As the massive lizard lunges onto the bridge, the heavy steel suspension cables begin to tangle around his limbs and torso. The more the creature struggles, the more the cables tighten, pinning him against the bridge's stone towers. Seeing the monster immobilized, the sergeant gives the order. A squadron of fighter jets screams overhead, unleashing a barrage of missiles that strike Godzilla with pinpoint accuracy. The survivors scramble out of the wreckage of their cab, watching from a safe distance as the bombardment continues. Nick slowly approaches the fallen Titan, watching as the life fades from its eyes. With a final, heavy breath, the king of the monsters collapses and his eyes go dim. Across the city, cheers erupt from the survivors and the military alike. The reign of terror is over. In the aftermath, Nick walks through the wreckage with Audrey and Victor. He receives a final call from Philippe, who quietly thanks him for his bravery before disappearing back into the shadows. The city begins to breathe a sigh of relief, believing the threat is gone forever. However, deep beneath the ruins of Madison Square Garden, the silence is broken by a soft cracking sound. Hidden away in a corner of the destroyed nest, a single, intact egg begins to hatch, revealing a new generation of the nightmare.